My name is Stephanie Baker. I'm 34 years old. I work as a maintenance engineer at a small factory in Indiana, right in the American Midwest. Right now, I live with my boyfriend Caleb and our 3-year-old son. That little boy is the most precious thing I have in this world. Most people, if they saw Liam running around the living room today, laughing, chasing a toy truck, yelling like he owns the place, would never guess that behind that smile were some brutal days we barely survived. Days that taught me something I didn't want to learn. Sometimes the person who calls you family is the first one to put a price tag on your child. Caleb and I got together when I was in my mid-20s, when life still felt like it moved in a straight line if you just worked hard enough. We weren't reckless. We weren't dramatic. We planned. We got pregnant the first time when I was 26. I remember Caleb standing in our tiny bathroom, staring at the test like it was written in a language only God understood. His hands were shaking, and he kept whispering, "We're really doing this." Then we lost it. The second pregnancy came after months of doctor visits, vitamins, and quiet prayers set into pillows so nobody could hear. And we lost that one too. Faster. Like my body didn't even want to let me pretend. After the second miscarriage, Caleb turned into a man made of spreadsheets and silence. He'd sit at the kitchen table late at night with a laptop open, researching every test, every procedure, every maybe. He used to be the head accountant at a major company in Indianapolis, the kind of guy who always had an answer. But grief doesn't care how smart you are. When the third pregnancy happened, I didn't celebrate right away. I didn't even smile. I just stared at the test and waited for the universe to take it back like it had before. At my 26 weeks appointment, the doctor leaned forward with that careful tone doctors use when they're about to drop something heavy. "If you want to keep this baby," she said, "you'll need weekly McKenna injections. 1 every week. Each one costs $1,000, and your insurance won't cover it. $1,000 a week." I remember the way Caleb's jaw tightened, the way his eyes flicked toward my stomach like he was trying to protect the baby with a stare. I remember the doctor explaining side effects and risks, but all I heard was the number repeating in my skull like a siren. $1,000. $1,000. $1,000. We didn't have rich parents. We didn't have a safety net. What we had was a piece of land Caleb and I had been saving for, years of overtime, second jobs, skipped vacations. That land was supposed to be where we built our first real home, and I sold it. I didn't even hesitate, not really. I told myself, we can buy land again. We can't replace a child we've already lost twice. After selling it and pulling together every bit of our savings, I transferred $29,000 into an account I thought was safe. It was an old account I'd used years ago when I used to help my mom handle household finances. Back then, all I cared about was speed and convenience. I didn't even remember her name was still on it. That mistake cost me almost everything. Around 9 a.m., just as I was getting ready to leave for the hospital for my first injection, a bank notification popped up on my phone. I opened it out of habit, thinking it was a routine update. But the number on the screen froze me in place. $12.64. At first, I didn't understand what I was looking at. My brain refused to accept it. I closed the app and opened it again. $12.64. I logged in again, and again. Like repetition could change reality. But the number didn't move. Something inside me went cold, not like fear, more like the moment right before an elevator drops. I forced myself to tap into the transaction history, hands so shaky I kept hitting the wrong buttons. There it was. One transfer. The full amount. $29,000. Gone in a quiet, clean transaction like it never belonged to me in the first place. And right beside it, in the details, was a name I hadn't said out loud in years, like a warning. Margaret Thompson, my mother. The rage didn't rise slowly. It hit like a reflex. I ran downstairs toward her room, already forming words I didn't even know I could scream. But the room was empty. Everything was still in place. Nothing looked disturbed, except for one thing. Her coat was missing from the hook by the door. My stomach dropped. A tight feeling crawled down my spine because the first place my mind went was the bank, like she'd woken up early just to beat me to my own money. I grabbed my phone, breathed in hard, and called her. She picked up after one ring, almost like she'd been waiting. "Where did you take that money?" I asked, my voice already cracking. No pause, no confusion, no denial. In a calm voice that felt colder than ice, she said, "I bought Brian a car. He needs a new one for work." For a second, the house went silent, like even the walls were listening. I swallowed, trying to hold on to control with both hands. "What about my baby?" I said. "What about your grandchild? He deserves a chance to live too. And then she said the sentence that still makes my skin go numb when I remember it. That child might not even make it, she replied, flat and indifferent. Brian's getting his life together. He has a clearer future. I couldn't speak. I couldn't even breathe right. When I didn't respond fast enough, she kept going, like she was reading rules off a sheet of paper. That account has my name on it. I have every right to use it. I stood there with the phone pressed to my ear, feeling like my body had turned into something heavy and useless. Like I was still standing, but only because I hadn't been told I was allowed to fall yet. Then, as if she hadn't said enough, she ended the call with a slow, cutting voice. Caleb needs to learn how to let go. Stop holding on to something that was never really yours. The words were so sharp I almost didn't notice the soft sound behind me. A breath. I turned. Caleb was standing in the hallway, barefoot, his face pale in a way I'd never seen. I didn't know how long he'd been there, but I knew he'd heard everything. His hands were trembling. His eyes weren't angry. They were empty, like something precious had cracked inside him, and he didn't even know what the pieces were called. Looking at him, then feeling the weight of my baby inside me, still alive, still fighting, I realized I didn't just lose money in that moment. I lost the last illusion that my mother would ever choose me. But I still had one job. I had to get that money back. So I grabbed my keys, told Caleb to stay home, and drove straight to the bank, clinging to one last, stupid thread of hope that maybe the transfer hadn't fully processed yet. So I grabbed my keys, told Caleb to stay home, and drove straight to the bank, clinging to one last, stupid thread of hope that maybe the transfer hadn't fully processed yet. Maybe there was still a way to stop it. But deep down, something warned me. What I'd just lost might not be the end of it. The bank teller didn't look at me like I was a fool. She looked at me like she'd seen this before. That was worse. I stood at the counter, hands flat against the polished surface, trying to keep my breathing steady while she typed in the account number. I watched her eyes move back and forth across the screen. Her mouth tightened slightly. "I'm sorry, Ms. Baker," she said gently. "The transfer has already cleared, and since the account is joint, the withdrawal was authorized." Authorized! That word echoed in my skull like a judge's gavel. Authorized meant legal. Legal meant untouchable. Untouchable meant I had just lost the only thing standing between my son and uncertainty. I didn't argue. I didn't cry. I just nodded like she'd told me the weather forecast. On the way back to the car, the sunlight felt too bright. I sat in the driver's seat for almost 30 minutes, staring at nothing. I opened my phone and checked our remaining accounts. A few $100s. Not even enough for the first injection. I thought about selling my car. The same car I was sitting in. But how would I get to work? How would I get to the hospital if something went wrong? My head felt like a mess of burnt wires. How do I save my child? That was the only question left. When I finally drove home, Caleb was sitting on the edge of our bed. His elbows rested on his knees. His hands were clasped so tight his knuckles were white. He looked up when I walked in. I didn't have to say anything. He already knew. He didn't cry. He didn't yell. He just leaned forward and pressed his forehead against my stomach like he was apologizing to someone who couldn't hear him yet. The night before, he'd whispered something into the darkness while lying beside me. If we lose this one too, I don't think I'll be able to get back up. I didn't know what to say then. I didn't know what to say now. But before we could even process what had happened, the front door opened. Margaret walked in like she had just come back from grocery shopping. Behind her was Brian. He tossed a set of car keys onto the table. I saw the dealership paperwork still tucked in the corner. Fresh ink. Brand new purchase. My lungs tightened. I didn't wait this time. I walked straight up to her. "Give me the money back. Right now." My voice was shaking, but not from fear. It was something deeper. Something that felt like it had been boiling for years and finally found a crack to escape through. She didn't flinch. She unscrewed the cap on a water bottle, took a slow sip, and said calmly, "The car's already bought. It's done." Done! "You took the money meant to save your grandchild," I shouted. "You knew exactly what it was for." Brian leaned back against the couch, arms crossed. "He needs a car to work," he said lazily. "You can't keep pouring money into something that might not even make it." Something inside me snapped so violently I physically felt it. "Something?" I repeated, my voice cracking. "That's my son." Margaret looked at me like I was overreacting to a spilled drink. "You're emotional," she said flatly. "You've already lost two. Maybe this is a sign." Caleb stood up behind me. He didn't shout. He didn't threaten. He just said, "That was our money." Margaret turned toward him with that same cold expression. "You're living under my roof," she said. "Be careful how you speak." And then she delivered the blow that changed everything. "You have 30 days," she said. "Find somewhere else to live." The air left my body. Brian swung his feet onto the coffee table and muttered, "If you can't provide for your family, maybe someone else should." I looked at him. This was the same little brother I used to walk home from school, the same boy I used to shield from bullies. Now he was looking at me like I was disposable. That night I didn't sleep. Caleb stayed beside me, his hand resting over my stomach, like if he kept physical contact with our son long enough, he could anchor him to this world. Around midnight, I walked into the kitchen alone and opened my laptop. I drafted an email to a small law office an old college friend once mentioned. I didn't hesitate while typing. If I had to take my own mother to court, I would. Let people say I turned my back on her. She turned her back first. But before I could even finish mapping out that plan, something unexpected happened the next morning. There was a knock at the door. When I opened it, I saw a small, straight-backed figure standing on the porch, hair pulled into a tight bun, eyes sharp and unwavering. Eleanor Thompson, my grandmother. She didn't ask questions. She didn't offer comfort. She stepped inside like she already knew the verdict. And when her eyes met mine, I felt something shift. This wasn't just a visit. It was a reckoning. Grandma Eleanor didn't hug me. She didn't even take off her coat. She stepped into the living room slowly, her shoes clicking against the hardwood floor like a judge approaching the bench. She looked smaller than I remembered. 82 years old, spine still straight, chin slightly lifted, but the air in the room shifted the moment she entered. Margaret was standing near the kitchen counter. Brian was leaning against the wall. No one spoke. Grandma broke the silence first. "Explain," she said. "One word." Margaret folded her arms. The money was in a joint account. I had the right. Grandma's eyes didn't blink. "And the house?" she asked calmly. Margaret's lips tightened. "It's in my name." That's when I saw it, the flicker of something in Grandma's expression. Not surprise, not confusion, calculation. She stepped forward so suddenly that even Brian straightened up. "You think I didn't keep records?" she said quietly. "You think I don't remember writing that check in March of 2014, the one that stopped your foreclosure?" My breath caught. Margaret's face paled slightly, but she recovered fast. "That was a gift," she shot back. Grandma took another step closer. "No," she said, "it was protection." Then everything moved at once. Grandma reached forward and grabbed Margaret by the arm, not violently, not wildly, but firmly, and dragged her toward the front door. I stood frozen as they crossed the porch and stepped into the yard. The morning sun was harsh. Neighbors' curtains shifted. Grandma's voice rang out across the lawn. "You will return that money," she said, steel in every syllable, "or I will take back this house and everything in it." Margaret laughed, but it sounded thin. "You have no rights here." Grandma's hands trembled, not from weakness, but fury. "I have receipts. I have witnesses. I have your late husband's letter thanking me for saving this house. You think I paid for it so you could throw my granddaughter and her unborn child into the street?" Brian took a step forward like he was about to intervene. Grandma didn't even look at him. "Don't," she said. He stopped. Behind me, Caleb stepped out onto the porch. I could feel his tension beside me, quiet but burning. He'd been silent all morning, but I knew that silence was coiled tight. Margaret turned her anger toward me. "You called her, didn't you?" she snapped. "You're tearing this family apart." I walked forward then. For the first time since all this started, I didn't feel numb. I felt clear. "No," I said, "you did that." My voice didn't shake. Margaret stared at me, like she didn't recognize me anymore. Maybe she didn't. Grandma released her arm and stepped back. "You have 48 hours, she said calmly. "Hire a lawyer. We're going to court." Then she did something that made my knees almost give out. She reached into her purse and handed me an envelope. Inside was a transfer receipt, nearly $7,000. "For the injections," she said simply. "We're not missing another week." Caleb inhaled sharply beside me. I felt his hand find mine and squeeze. That wasn't all. Grandma turned toward the driveway, where Brian's brand new pickup truck gleamed like a trophy. "That truck will be sold," she said flatly, "and the money will go back where it belongs." Margaret pulled out her phone immediately. "I'll call the police." Grandma didn't even blink. "Go ahead," she said in a voice so calm it was terrifying. "I'm 82 years old. I have nothing to lose, but before they get here, that truck and half this yard will be gone." Silence fell like a heavy curtain. Brian lowered his phone first. Margaret followed. And just like that, something invisible shifted. The power dynamic in that house flipped. The next morning, they were gone. No screaming, no dramatic exit. Just an empty driveway where the truck had been. In the days that followed, Grandma moved in with us without formally announcing it. She didn't ask permission. She didn't need to. Her presence felt like a wall. Caleb started the legal paperwork immediately. We contacted Harold Watkins, an old friend of Grandma's and a former prosecutor who now ran a private practice. I could see something strange in Caleb during those days. Focus. controlled anger, a kind of sharpened resolve. But one evening, as he was reviewing documents at the dining table, I saw his hand pause over his phone. A message preview flashed briefly across the screen. Tara, his ex-girlfriend. She now worked as a paralegal at a firm that occasionally collaborated with Margaret's new attorney. I saw the way Caleb's jaw tightened. "What does she want?" I asked quietly. He hesitated. "She says your mom thinks she can win," he replied. "She says they're confident." I didn't like the flicker in his eyes. Not guilt, not longing, but old history resurfacing like a bruise you forgot you had. "She doesn't matter," I said. He looked up at me, and for the first time in weeks, his expression softened. "You matter," he said, "you and him." His hand moved to my stomach, and that was enough. The first injection was administered on schedule, week 27, then 28, then 29. By week 30, the doctor warned us the critical window was approaching, and then came the court date. Allen County Courthouse, Monday morning. Margaret showed up dressed sharply, Brian at her side. They looked prepared for war. So were we. But as I sat there beside Grandma and Caleb, listening to arguments unfold, I realized something. This wasn't just about money anymore. This was about ownership. Of a house. Of dignity. Of boundaries. And I wasn't backing down again. The courtroom smelled like old paper and tension. I remember staring at the polished wood in front of me while Margaret's attorney spoke first. Confident, controlled, almost bored. He argued that the house had been legally transferred into Margaret's name years ago, that the money withdrawn from the joint account was family property, that my grandmother's confrontation in the yard constituted intimidation. They even filed a countersuit. When he mentioned elder abuse and harassment, I saw Grandma's mouth twitch slightly. Not fear, annoyance. Then it was our turn. Harold Watkins stood slowly, adjusted his glasses, and began laying out the truth, piece by piece, like he was assembling something fragile but undeniable. March 2014, bank transfer records showing that the down payment for the house came directly from Eleanor Thompson's personal account. A handwritten letter from my late father thanking her for saving the home from foreclosure. Years of receipts showing that Caleb and I had covered utilities, property taxes, maintenance, over $500 a month for more than 6 years. And then the recording. The one where my mother said clearly, without hesitation, "That account is in my name. I had the right." The courtroom shifted when that played. Margaret's jaw tightened. Brian stared at the floor. Then came the doorbell camera footage. Grandma dragging Margaret into the yard. Not punching, not hitting, just firm, determined. Margaret's lawyer tried to spin it as physical aggression. Harold calmly countered. No injuries, no intent to harm. A grandmother protecting her pregnant granddaughter and legal property. 3 hours passed like 3 days. When the judge called for a recess to review everything, I felt hollow, not hopeful, not confident, just exhausted. 2 weeks later, we returned for the final hearing. I didn't expect to win anymore. I just wanted fairness. The judge began reading the decision in a steady, even tone. Ownership of the house would be transferred back to Eleanor Thompson, as the original funds came solely from her assets, and no valid legal gift agreement existed. Margaret was ordered to repay the $29,980 withdrawn from my account. She was responsible for court fees, totaling $3,200, and fined $500 for filing baseless countersuits. Her accusations of intimidation were dismissed entirely. The ruling would take effect in 7 days. When it was over, I didn't smile. I lowered my head and let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding for months. Caleb squeezed my hand under the table. Grandma didn't react at all. She simply nodded once, as if confirming what she already knew. Margaret, however, looked different. Not furious. Not screaming. Just empty. Over the next 3 weeks, she filed appeal after appeal, all denied. And just like that, the house I thought we had lost forever was no longer hers. But what shocked me most happened afterward. A week after the verdict, Grandma called me onto the porch. She handed me a folder. Inside were notarized documents. She had transferred the house into my name. I stared at her. Why? I asked. She didn't look at me. This house belongs to the one who protects it, she said quietly, not the one who claims it. The next morning, she packed her small suitcase. She returned to her apartment near the church, the one she'd lived in alone for 10 years after Grandpa passed. I stood in the doorway and watched her walk down the alley until she disappeared from sight. Winning the house didn't feel like victory. It felt like something permanent had cracked. And I didn't know yet that we weren't finished paying. Because in mid-June, just when I thought maybe we could breathe again, the storm shifted. I was organizing medical paperwork for my next injection when a sharp pain tore through my stomach. I dropped the folder. Caleb rushed in. Within minutes, we were in the car, racing to the hospital. 32 weeks. Too early. Liam was born at 3 a.m., weighing just 1.8 kilograms. He didn't cry loudly. He barely cried at all. The doctors moved fast. Oxygen, tubes, incubator. 32 weeks has good survival odds, one nurse whispered to me in the hallway. But he needs time. The first time I saw my son through the glass, he looked impossibly small, wrapped in wires, his chest rising in tiny, fragile movements. But he was breathing. And that was enough. Grandma came the next morning. She stood beside me in silence for a long time. Then she placed her hand on my shoulder. "This child was born to survive," she said softly. For the first time since all of this began, I cried. Not from fear, from relief. Liam spent over 2 months in the NICU. Blood transfusions, oxygen adjustments, sleepless shifts between me and Caleb. We stopped counting days. We counted breaths. When the doctors finally told us he could go home, they also told us something else. His lungs hadn't fully developed. He would need oxygen support for at least the first 3 to 4 years of his life. Permanent damage. I looked at Caleb when they said that. He didn't crumble. He nodded. "Then we'll learn," he said. And we did. We brought our son home with a small oxygen tank beside his crib. Nights were filled with machine hums and checklists. Caleb logged every irregular breath in a notebook. I memorized the rhythm of his chest rising and falling. Exhaustion became normal. But so did gratitude. I thought that was the end of it. I thought maybe we had earned peace. I was wrong. Because 6 months later, they came back. And this time, they weren't coming for money. They were coming for my child. Part 5. They came for my son. Liam was 6 months old the morning my mother showed up again. The oxygen machine was humming softly beside his crib. Caleb was in the kitchen rinsing bottles. I was folding tiny onesies on the couch, trying to enjoy something ordinary. Then I heard Clara. No, not Clara. That was the old version of this story. This is mine. I heard my own voice first, sharp, panicked, from the hallway window. "Get out of here!" I didn't even remember running to the front door. When I stepped outside, Margaret and Brian were standing in the yard like they had every right to be there. Margaret's hair was neatly done, her blouse ironed, like she was visiting neighbors. Brian stood with his hands in his pockets, scanning the house like he was appraising property. Caleb was already outside, standing between them and the porch steps. Margaret smiled. "I just came to see my grandson," she said sweetly. "I wasn't going to do anything." The sweetness made my stomach twist. Brian added casually, "That's my nephew. I have a right to see him." A right. The word burned. I stepped forward, my entire body shaking, not from fear, but from months of swallowed anger finally clawing its way out. "You said he didn't deserve to live," I said. Margaret's smile faltered. "You emptied the account meant to save him," I continued. "You bought a car. You called him something that might not even make it." Silence. Even the birds felt quiet. "And now," I said, my voice steady in a way that surprised even me, "you want to stand here and claim him as family?" Margaret's expression shifted. Not guilt, not remorse. Just irritation. "You're being dramatic," she said. "That was months ago." Months ago. Like that made it smaller. Behind me, I felt Caleb step closer. He didn't raise his voice, but his presence changed the air. "He's our son," he said quietly, "and you don't get to rewrite what you did." Margaret's eyes flicked toward him briefly, and then she looked at me again. "I carried you for 9 months," she said. "You can't erase that." I stared at her. "You erased it yourself." For a moment, I saw something flicker in her eyes. Not anger. Not pride. Something emptier than both. I didn't wait for it to settle. "Get off my property," I said. The words felt final. She didn't move. So I pulled out my phone. I showed her the court documents. The house deed. The restraining paperwork we had already begun drafting after her appeals. "I'm calling the police," I said. Brian scoffed, but he stepped back slightly. Within minutes, the squad car pulled up. I explained everything calmly. Showed them the ruling. Showed them the history. The officers asked Margaret and Brian to leave. They didn't resist. But before walking away, Margaret turned back one last time. There was no fury in her face, just a hollow space where something human used to be. A few days later, I finalized the permanent restraining order. I didn't celebrate. I didn't feel victorious. I felt protective. And that was enough. Life didn't suddenly become easy. The oxygen machine still hummed at night. Caleb still worked 6 days a week. I still woke up at 2 a.m. to check tubing connections and adjust humidifier levels. But the shadows outside our gate were gone. And that changed everything. 3 years have passed since that day. Liam still needs oxygen at night. But during the day, he runs. He laughs. He falls and gets back up like any other kid. The first word he ever said wasn't mom. It wasn't dad. It was grandma. He said it one afternoon while Eleanor was sitting on the couch, reading quietly. "Gamma," he whispered. She froze. Her hand stopped moving. She didn't say anything. She just turned her head slightly and wiped the corner of her eye. That was the only time I ever saw her cry. Today, Caleb works from home part-time so he can help with Liam's respiratory appointments. He's not the silent, spreadsheet-obsessed man he became during those dark months. He laughs again. And I'm still the woman who works long shifts and logs oxygen readings at night. I'm not perfect. I'm not eloquent. But I protected my son. And if you ever find yourself standing at a crossroads between blood and kindness, choose the one who protects you when it costs them something. Because blood alone doesn't make a family. Protection does. Love does. And sometimes, walking away does. 3 years ago, I told my mother to get out of my house. I don't regret it. Because when I look at my son breathing peacefully in his sleep, oxygen tube gently curved against his cheek, I know exactly who I chose. And I would choose him again.